Kia ora tātou, ngā mihi o te ata. I'm Catherine Iorns from Victoria University of Wellington. I teach environmental law, among other things, but I'm here in an environmental law capacity. And I want to thank Chris really for inviting me up. This stems just from a conversation we had at the Amnesty annual meeting, where he talked about this, and I just about the Constitutional Review, and I commented that, well, no one's mentioned environmental rights. Okay, it's not in the Constitutional Advisory Panel's terms of reference, it's not in their website background information, it's not in the information pack they send out, it's not in any of the official discussions. Like, and we had one organised by my own university, these panel debates that went live on Radio New Zealand, and nowhere, there's one that Margaret Wilson was involved in, but on a human rights side, but no one talked about environmental, fundamental rights or of any sort, and didn't even occur to people in my own faculty to think about it and even to tell me what was going on for me to suggest it to them. You know, so when you look at it on that basis, it's just not in most people's consciousness. So I mentioned that to Chris, and basically this is I'm putting my money where my mouth is. So I'm coming to talk to you about environmental rights. Now, first, just by way of identifying the scope of the topic, I do note that the symposium this weekend is focused on human rights. Right, so that's not really an ecological, ecosystemic, ecocentric approach. I will be making some reference to that, but I am going to try and focus on the human rights side, isn't focusing on the human side of environment. I'm just going to sneak a little bit of the wider stuff in. So what I do plan to address are why we have the human rights we have now, because that's like a precursor. That's a general one. Why might we want a human right to a healthy environment? And then ways that other countries have addressed this. Most of the time I had planned to spend on the last part of this, show the different ways it can be done with some issues that you need to think about if you were going to make a submission on how you might incorporate some. Now, I do have a little one-page or double-sided, 4 pages on one piece of paper, handout at the front that some people have got. If you haven't, maybe I can pass one around, or other people can. That's for when we come to the third part on other ways other countries have done it. So first, why do we have human rights in laws? Right, in laws to start with. Margaret. And where do they come from? If you think about that, so that's kind of why do we have, for example, the Bill of Rights that we do now? Why have we got those laws in it? Or those particular rights? Why were they chosen? I'm not going to go into all of that, but I want you to think about that as the wider framework. And so I like to think of human rights statements and laws, right, as solutions, as remedies to problems that have been faced. Right, generally, and you can think of any number of them, but I mean, right from the 1689 Bill of Rights, that stemmed out of a constitutional crisis, right? The French Revolution, their Bill of Rights stemmed out of, you know, crises and problems that they thought needed addressing in that Bill of Rights. Slavery in the 1800s gave rise to certain rights. Women's rights in the 1800s and 1900s, claims were made for rights to get over the problems that were faced, right, on the ground. The end of World War II, or the horrors of World War II, gave rise to the Universal Declaration on Human Rights, right? And then the many years of statements around what it should include. Working conditions, right? The rights of workers came about as a result of the Industrial Revolution and the problems that faced, or that gave rise to in terms of working conditions. So you just think of that as a background, right, to why we've got some of the ones we've got. If you, before I say the next one, they don't usually deal with unforeseen problems, do they? Your statements you've got of human rights often don't sort of think of, well, what haven't we addressed that might come up one day, right? And let's make it a law that we can't, you know, that we shouldn't be violating these things. And what I want to then bring in the environment is you often don't account, or certainly write down in laws, things that are taken for granted. And I just want, for an analogy that maybe more people are familiar with, think of the Treaty of Waitangi, right? And what's te reo's not mentioned in it, is it? But we have held, the courts and the tribunal have held that te reo is protected under the general word taonga. It wasn't thought, but why wasn't it in there? Nobody thought it wasn't a possibility of being lost, right? It was not even thought to be protected. So you think of that as an analogy. I'm going to use that. It's a part of a background assumption, right, of just you're living in this world. Some things you take for granted you don't think need to be written down as to be protected because you don't think they're ever going to be lost. I think the same with the environment. Right? I think we can put the environment in that category. And before I get there, also another comment that you make as part of the background, new rights have nearly always been a battle. Right? People argue over whether they're worthy of protecting. Think of rights for the mental health, mentally disabled workers. But especially big battle, even over the years where economic rights have battled with one of the rights that have been worthy of argued to be protected. I mean, slavery and workers' rights are classic examples of economic versus human rights. Right? And yet the human rights have still prevailed. It might have taken many years to do it, but they still have. I just say you've always got this as part of the history of human rights. And especially where there's this inherent difference, right, such that maybe the rights are seen as undeserving of a particular group of people. And you saw that with race rights and women and the mentally ill. You know, there's a particular group, there's a difference. Maybe there's a reason they don't have these rights. Right? Now, you find that in the environment area, it's even harder to argue if you're looking at animals and trees. I'm not thinking of the rights, but you know, do we think they're inherently different and maybe they're undeserving of rights? You know, so again, put this as a part of a background. This does happen. The relationship with humans are often characterized as instrumental and hierarchical. Maybe they don't have equal rights or even any kind of rights that we can recognize. So we do face these kinds of background issues and problems when we come to looking at rights in relation to environment. So I want to comment, so moving on to the environment itself, I think that we take this for granted. Right? It's one of those, you know, abundant and clean air and water. Okay, stuff and food rather. We trust it's going to be uncontaminated and there's going to be enough for us. It's going to be healthy and we're not going to run out. All right. We don't think it's going to need protecting. Now, a lot of countries overseas, that's not the case. We're actually comparatively lucky. It's not just luck; it's partly management. But I think that is becoming. We're on the verge of that not being the case. Both in just the stuff that serves our needs quite apart from the environment itself. You know, there's a lot of environment which doesn't exist solely to serve our needs, you know, I mean, unless you want to look at aesthetics and things like that, but people want to argue about the Denniston Plateau, for example, and that's not, they don't say it's because it's going to hurt our water or our food or any other supply of our basic needs, but it's for an environmental sake, things like that. But World Wildlife Fund is an example of one group that's doing some really good research on the stats, and we see there's all sorts of, they published a report last year in July to coincide with the Rio Plus 20 about the state of New Zealand's environment, and we've got all sorts of problems with, you know, air quality, water quality and quantity, ecosystems, fish, native flora and fauna, all sorts of things. So I'm not going to go into that in too much in detail, but I just want to say that there are problems on the horizon as well as some that are beginning now. And we are relatively free of most of the worst problems overseas, largely because we outsource most of our production that has all the damaging pollution side of things. But so we don't have yet the bee colony collapse that most others, the pollution from industry, the loss of the beneficial insects on the scale that they've got overseas due to GM crops, for example, the air pollution that you get in some cities. Yet, you know, that doesn't say that it couldn't happen, but the biggest one, of course, global warming, or global climate change, I should say, due to, you know, our increasing carbon concentrations. So there are possible reasons for us to think that we might not always be able to take the environmental services, certainly the eco-services, for granted. Okay, so there's a background. Maybe we need to devise some new rules, right, to live by, so as to better protect these eco-services, if you just want to look at the human rights side of things, all the services we gain, the benefits from the environment. I suggest there are 4 ways we can look at it. We've got the first one, the rights, and in your handout you'll see I've actually put them in these headings. The first one is the rights of humans to a healthy environment. Now that's just the shorthand. There's a lot of different ways of wording it, but the rights of humans to a healthy environment, i.e. for our needs, life, health, question productivity. It's an instrumental right and a definitely human-focused right. Right. Second one is rights of animals and even the environment itself to life and its own healthy environment. So there's rights of nature. There's a possible one. not maybe in a human Bill of Rights, but maybe you could have a wider Bill of Rights. Third, you might get duties of states to protect those rights. That's another way to do it. And then fourth, duties of individuals to protect those rights. And all of those four aspects have already been constitutionally required somewhere in the world. Okay, I want to put this thought in your head. We are in the minority. Right? So, as an example, here, there's a difference between constitutions and just legislation. A constitution is fundamental documents constituting the state versus other statutes that might be made up. This is just in constitutions, okay? See all the black, dark bits of the world? Those are maps of nations with environmental protection provisions in their constitutions. It's most of the world, right? And most of the nations in the world. Yeah, there's a much bigger one when it works out bigger. Oh, there's a different one. Now, this one here, slightly fewer, because this is actually having a human right to a healthy environment. This is in the Constitution, a human right to a healthy environment. Again, I think I've got the numbers actually in a separate. Yes, well, I've got a paper with numbers in it somewhere to show you in a minute too. So that's within the constitutions. Now the same, there aren't quite so many, but the same where we've got nations recognising a right in some form or other, not in the constitutions, but in legislation, as other things are saying, well, again, you've got most of the world recognising a human right to a healthy environment in their laws. Doesn't it, when you look at it like that, you just think, oh, we're kind of in the minority, aren't we? And I think that's actually fairly significant. The ones, now I will say in a minute, which ones we're in sort of company with. So this one, these are the numbers, right? When you've got, of the four categories that I mentioned, we have a government duty to protect the environment. It's 140 out of 193 nations in the world. A government duty to protect the environment. Even if they don't recognise a human right to a healthy environment, they've got lots of duties to protect it, which could be for the environment's sake, not just for human sake. Right? Which I think is quite large. An individual right, that's the 92 nations. That was in, again, these are in constitutions, notice, not just laws generally. Individual duties to protect the environment, 83 out of 193. And procedural environmental rights, 30 out of 93. I didn't mention procedural ones before, but sorry. So the interesting thing is, that's when you add in the recognition of the countries. The one of this one here, when you add in all of the other legislation as well as the constitutions, you get 178 out of 193 countries in the world recognising a human right to a healthy environment. Sorry, that's this one. This one here goes from 92 to 178 out of 193. All right, just the individual right to a healthy environment. 92% of the world. So, who are we in company with? We don't have one. Who else doesn't have one? Oh, Australia, Canada and the USA. Now the UK doesn't have one in their domestic laws, but they've signed up to some European conventions which has one. So the UK is taken out of that. But who are we also in company with? Some others that we wouldn't normally think that we want to be in company with. Myanmar, North Korea, Cambodia, Laos, Kuwait, Lebanon, China. Countries that, again, haven't added a human right to a healthy environment. So when you look at it like that, you sort of think, oh, maybe we could look at something. It wouldn't be quite so unusual. We think it's unusual, but in the worldwide scope, not. So that's where the handout comes in. What I've done is simply pulled together a few different countries' provisions that illustrate different aspects of what some of these rights and provisions might look like. A lot of people there's a document that this is a really excellent book. David Boyd came out with this last year. He's a Canadian, UBC, I think, a global study of constitutions, human rights and the environment, and it really is a global study. He covers nearly every single country in the world. No, nearly, I say nearly. He doesn't do any Pacific ones on New Zealand. We're the only region he doesn't do. Oh, you're just waving. sorry. I saw this hand up. Yes, yeah, it's just like, oh, well, no, I see you just scratching his elbow, sorry, my fault. But when we see a pen waving, you think, oh, God. He's actually got a lot of really good information about these. He's got an appendix that's on a website, 300 pages long. All he's done is list is the text of these various different provisions, 300 pages of text, which is huge. Anyway, so some of them are here. All right. We have the human rights to a healthy environment. I think the best, well, there's simple versions, there's complicated, detailed versions. I think the best simple version you might want to say is simply that, you know, individuals, say in this country, have a right to an environment adequate for health and well-being. That's probably the best formulation, I think, that's simple. That addresses human needs. There are others that mention, now some of them, I'm going to mention some of the terms, but also when you read some of the English provisions in these documents about other countries' constitutions, these countries' constitutions were not written in English. And some of them look, especially the Spanish ones, look like an odd translation or almost literal translation, and they use a lot, I wouldn't say flowery, but a lot more demonstrative language in Spanish, right, as an example. But there are quite a few countries' constitutions, interestingly, refer to maintaining an ecological equilibrium. And I can, as a lawyer, I can say that's just going to generate lots of argument. Don't put words like that in your constitution. Just say, I want a right to a healthy environment, or one suitable for health, maintaining health and well-being. Some refer to, equilibrium or balance. Suitable for development of the person, that's the African Charter, is focused on development. And a lot of the third world countries add that bit about development as well. But I don't think we need to, I think it's bringing in, is muddying the waters. There's quite a few different wordings, and you'll see, I'm not going to read them all out. I mean, the simplest is Belgium's, which I haven't even written on there. It's just a right to the protection of a healthy environment. But another simple one, actually Norway's got two things in there. Norway has a right to an environment that's conducive to health, right, but also to natural surroundings whose productivity and diversity are preserved. So these got both human and environmental aspects in the same one. The South Africa's one is good. They talk about future generations, the South African one is really helpful because it talks about everyone has the right to an environment that is not harmful to health or well-being, right, the same idea, but then also to have the environment itself protected for the benefit of present and future generations, not just the environment for health and well-being. So maybe something like the Denniston Plateau, you know, that kind of thing, just as an example that's been in the news lately. I've given you these as a range, and also including where they came from. Like they started off with the Stockholm Declaration in '72 and what that one looks like, you know, which kind of gave rise to a lot of these other international documents. I'm not going to go through them because I've got 15 minutes, not 30. Because I thought there was 3 people, and now we've got 6. So just as an illustration of the detailed version, over on page 2, if you want, when I say a detailed version, sorry, it's on the right-hand side of your of the first page on your double one. Bolivia doesn't say right to healthy environment, it says a right to life, biodiversity, pure water, clean air, freedom from genetic modification and contamination. All right, that's a little bit more detailed. Look at Santa Monica's. That just got passed about a month ago. Actually 2 months ago now. All residents of Santa Monica possess, that's in California, it's a town there, inalienable rights to clean water from sustainable sources, marine waters safe for active and passive recreation, clean indoor and outdoor air, a sustainable food system that provides healthy, locally grown food, a sustainable climate that supports thriving human life and a flourishing biodiverse environment, comprehensive waste disposal systems that do not degrade the environment, and a sustainable energy future based on renewable energy sources. Can't really get much more comprehensive, certainly in terms of what we see as possible problems that we might face, right, and that, you know, certainly facing in the US. They've also got right to self-governance and other things. That Santa Monica one has been maintained in 2 other, very similar manner, in 2 or 3 other towns and states in America, all right, because it's a current movement in the States. Anti-corporation, like anti-Nestle trying to bottle their town water supply, you know, anti-open cast mining pits in their local backyard. When, the states have a tendency to authorise something state level in the backyard of a town that doesn't want it. And so the town passes these laws and strips the corporations of the rights and sends them out of town. And then all the corporation does, unfortunately, is get in a new, support new local body elections and different councillors that overturn the laws. That has happened in a couple of places too. Certainly a big, what do you call, a sort of wake-up call for how important the elected representatives and their laws are. Anyway, so that's this human right. There is also, we could, if you really wanted, if you thought they were important, you could add in rights of nature. Right, I've given that as a general heading. The Santa Monica's also got that one, which is the first on your list. Natural communities and ecosystems possess fundamental and inalienable rights to exist and flourish in the city of Santa Monica. Right, and their residents may bring actions in order to enforce them. Ecuador is the famous one that's been reproduced a lot, referenced by Māori a lot in New Zealand because of nature, or Pachamama, as in Mother Earth, where life is reproduced and exists, has the right to exist, persist, maintain and regenerate its vital cycles, structure, functions and its processes and evolution. Again, a very comprehensive, not just fundamental right to exist, but all those detailed versions of what a right to exist might entail. I've also got on the other side there how you might phrase duties. Different places, there's duties of governments and states. I've given a couple. A developed country, Sweden, right, very much socio-economic, and Bhutan, undeveloped but very comprehensive. Ontario, I noticed, oh, just as an aside, I forgot to say, when I showed the map before of all these countries, the USA and Canada were not shown in dark. But a lot of states, 5 provinces in Canada, have enacted their own environmental bills of rights and their own statements. So the Canada as a whole hasn't, but and 6 American states have. And so it's a little bit more prevalent than it looked even from that map. And duties of individuals. Oh, sorry, it's all right. The reason I mentioned that there is I've got the Ontario one on there. They have a very comprehensive procedural Bill of Rights, rights to information and rights to environmental impact information, and a register of any environmental impact project that goes on in the province. So duties of individuals, and then now you might want something in a preamble. All right, I've got that preamble there as well. The French have got a lovely one where they refer to a Charter of Environment. So not only do they have a reference to the Charter, they have a whole separate document with lots of environmental rights in it. Like instead of a Bill of Rights, they've got like a Charter of Environmental Rights. Okay, with say, you know, more than 5 articles in it. And then you might have procedural and related rights. And I've got right at the very end, if you could put it all together, put all these different aspects, as an example is Spain's one. Now Spain's one is actually quite old, but they've got that at the bottom right. You've got an individual right, a natural right and the procedural right. You might want enforcement in there as well. So I'm going to have to wrap up. I'm going to suggest that we need all of those. I think we do take the environment for granted. I think we don't want its protection to be happenstance, like te reo. What if taonga wasn't in the treaty? Well, how would they have protected the language? They might have, hopefully they would have found some way to do it. Do you think they would have said, no, it's not in there, sorry, we can't do it? We don't want the environment to be subject to that kind of happenstance. Oh, we've got a right to life. We don't need a separate provision, we'll just stick it under there. But that's happenstance. You've got to rely on a court interpreting it in. All right? So I think we need a strong and fundamental right. We need it for us now. I think we need it for the environment itself and future generations. We need duties to protect it. We need procedural rights. So I'm going for the whole, I get something in the preamble and then a whole charter. I'd settle for just a couple of little statements, you know, like some of the other countries in there as well. But if you want to make a submission, then to the Constitutional Advisory Panel, then feel free to trawl through some of these and say, I think we need a whole range of these things, and whatever you consider, we should be considering this. Thank you very much. Kia ora tātou.